This is where many societies lose their way. They begin with a word that sounds noble, powerful, and untouchable: freedom. They speak of rights. They defend rights. They shout about rights in parliaments, in classrooms, in media, and across every platform available. But somewhere along the way, something essential was forgotten. They focused so intensely on human rights that they forgot the right to be truly human. There is a difference between having rights and understanding what you are. Rights speak about value. Identity speaks about purpose. And when value is separated from purpose, confusion begins. A human being without purpose becomes a consumer of rights, not a guardian of truth. A person who does not understand why they exist will eventually redefine what existence means. The modern mindset says you are free, define yourself. Create yourself, be whatever you feel, do whatever you desire. Truth is subjective, morality is flexible, authority is oppressive, tradition is outdated, God is optional, and if you question any of this, you are against human rights. But what happens when freedom is detached from responsibility? What happens when rights are disconnected from truth? You don't get liberty. You get chaos disguised as progress. If a manufacturer creates a machine, that machine has a design. It has a purpose. If you ignore the design and use it however you wish, you will damage it. The damage is not because the machine is flawed, but because it is being used outside its purpose. The same applies to humanity. If we do not understand why we were created, we will misuse ourselves. Human rights without understanding human purpose becomes a weapon. It becomes a tool to justify desires instead of disciplining them. And when desire becomes king, truth becomes enemy. The real question is not what are my rights. The real question is why was I created? Because purpose determines value. If you don't know the purpose of a car, you cannot determine its price. If you don't know the purpose of a home, you cannot measure its worth. If you don't know the purpose of a human being, you will reduce them to feelings, impulses, and personal definition. When purpose is removed, identity becomes unstable. A society that forgets its creator will eventually forget itself. It will celebrate independence from God while becoming enslaved to appetite. It will shout about liberation while being chained to ego. Pride becomes the invisible ruler. Pride whispers, you don't need authority. Pride whispers, you define truth. Pride whispers, you answer to no one. And when pride takes root, obedience becomes weakness. Humility becomes foolishness. Submission becomes oppression. Yet without humility, there is no growth. Without obedience to truth, there is no stability. Look closely at the pattern. When children reject the wisdom of parents, they do not become freer, they become confused. When a student rejects the guidance of a teacher, they do not become wiser, they become misinformed. When humanity rejects divine guidance, it does not become enlightened. It becomes lost. The internal decay always precedes the external collapse. What begins in the heart appears in the culture. What begins in the mind manifests in the laws. When the inner compass is broken, the outer structures will reflect that distortion. You can change legislation, you can modify language, you can redefine words. But if the soul is corrupted by pride, nothing external will fix it. The image of humanity is self-created. It was meant to reflect its creator. A son reflects his father. A daughter reflects her family. Identity is not self-invented, it is received. When you abandon that truth and attempt to construct yourself independently, you fracture the image. Pride always promises elevation, but it produces deformity. The ancient rebellion in heaven began the same way. The highest angelic being fell not because of weakness, but because of pride. The desire to ascend above his place caused him to descend below it. Pride does not lift, it casts down. When a person insists on doing life in my way, they often end up serving what they thought they were controlling. The one who refuses to submit to God eventually submits to ego. The one who refuses divine authority ends up enslaved by personal desire. And desire is a cruel master. You may think that independence makes you powerful. But true strength is not found in resisting authority. It is found in aligning with truth. A branch disconnected from the tree does not become stronger. It withers. A river separated from its source dries up. When humanity disconnects from its creator, it loses clarity about its purpose. And when purpose is unclear, rights are misused. You begin to see a society that speaks constantly about equality, but struggles to define what a human is. You see a culture that promotes expression, but punishes disagreement. You see a system that defends choice, but rejects moral boundaries. The problem is not rights themselves. The problem is rights without responsibility. Freedom without truth becomes self-destruction. A human being was not created merely to consume pleasure, accumulate wealth, or redefine identity. A human being was created to reflect divine character. To love, to serve, to obey, to honor, to create within boundaries, and to steward creation responsibly. The role of a son is not to compete with the father. It is to trust, to learn, and to grow under guidance. The role of a daughter is not to overthrow wisdom, but to embody it. When that relationship is broken, confusion replaces clarity. You cannot remain a son while rejecting the father's voice. You cannot claim inheritance while despising authority. Relationship requires obedience. Love requires humility. Many speak about faith. Few live it. Many proclaim belief. Few embody surrender. Why? Because surrender threatens pride. Pride does not allow self-denial. Pride demands recognition. Pride resists to admit error. And without humility, service becomes impossible. A prideful heart cannot serve. It expects to be served. It cannot confess wrongdoing. It shifts blame. It cannot kneel. It stands defiantly even when broken, yet transformation begins with humility. The moment a person acknowledges, I am not self-sufficient, the process of restoration begins. The moment someone says, I need guidance, wisdom can enter. The moment pride is laid down, identity can be restored. The deformity is internal before it is external. Spiritual paralysis happens before visible decline. A person may appear functional outwardly, but be lifeless inwardly. A paralyzed soul cannot move toward truth. It cannot progress in virtue. It cannot rise above ego. Spiritual paralysis is subtle. It feels like autonomy, but it is stagnation. It feels like independence, but it is isolation. And just as physical paralysis renders a body unable to act, spiritual pride renders a soul unable to grow. The tragedy of pride is that it disguises itself as strength. It tells you that you are empowered when you are actually detached. It convinces you that you are enlightened when you are actually blind to your own limitations. It celebrates autonomy while quietly eroding your ability to connect with truth. When a society collectively embraces pride, it begins to redefine everything. Marriage, identity, morality, even reality itself. Words lose stable meaning. Boundaries become fluid. Tradition is mocked. Sacred things are trivialized. And in the midst of this redefinition, the human heart grows restless. Why restless? Because purpose cannot be erased. It can be ignored, suppressed, or distorted, but it cannot be removed. Deep within every human being is a longing to know why they exist. That longing cannot be satisfied by entertainment, status, or endless choice. When the soul was designed to reflect something eternal, it cannot be fulfilled by something temporary. Serving God is not slavery. It is alignment. It is returning to design. It is stepping back into the image that was intended from the beginning. The paradox is this. When you surrender to divine authority, you become freer than when you surrender to yourself. Self-rule without wisdom leads to fragmentation. Every desire pulls in a different direction. Every impulse demands satisfaction. Without a higher anchor, the individual becomes divided internally. True freedom is not the ability to do anything. It is the strength to do what is right. Humility does not diminish a person. It refines them. Obedience does not erase identity, it clarifies it. Service does not weaken character, it strengthens it. When a son listens to his father's instruction, he is not losing himself. He is becoming mature. When a daughter honors wisdom, she is not oppressed, she is fortified. When a believer submits to God, they are not shrinking. They are expanding into their true self. The world may call this weakness, but humility has a power pride can never access. Pride isolates. Humility connects. Pride hardens. Humility softens. Pride divides. Humility unites. You cannot reflect divine character while clinging to ego. Reflection requires transparency. A mirror covered in dirt cannot reflect light. Pride is that dirt. Selfhood clouds the surface. Saltation blocks illumination. To reflect God in a godless world requires transformation from within. It requires dying to the version of yourself that insists on being supreme. It requires letting go of the need to always be right. It requires confessing when you are wrong. It requires serving without applause. This is not easy. Speaking about faith is easy. Living it is costly. Words require little sacrifice. Obedience demands everything. That is why many speak of belief, but few embody it. It is comfortable to claim allegiance. It is uncomfortable to practice self-denial. It is simple to attend religious gatherings. It is difficult to discipline pride daily. Yet the path of humility is the only path that leads to restoration. When pride entered the heart of the highest angel, he fell from glory to ruin. That fall began internally before it manifested externally. The same pattern repeats in human life. Inner rebellion precedes outer collapse. Spiritual death begins quietly. It begins with the thought, I know better. It grows with the declaration, I decide. It matures into the conviction, I don't need guidance. And by the time consequences appear, the heart has already hardened, but restoration is possible. The soul that was paralyzed by pride can be revived by surrender. The heart that was hardened by ego can be softened by repentance. The image that was distorted can be restored through humility. You were not created to drift aimlessly through culture. You were not designed to be reshaped by every ideological trend. You were not meant to redefine yourself endlessly in pursuit of acceptance. You were created with intention. Your existence has meaning beyond personal preference. Your identity has depth beyond social validation. Your value is anchored in divine design, not in fluctuating opinion. When you understand this, rights are no longer abused. They are stewarded responsibly. Freedom is no longer chaotic. It is disciplined. Authority is no longer oppressive. It is protective. The call is not to abandon human dignity. The call is to root human dignity in purpose. Value without purpose collapses. Purpose without humility fails. Humility without obedience is incomplete. To remain a true son or daughter requires trust, requires faith. Faith requires surrender, and surrender requires courage. It takes courage to admit you are not self-made. It takes courage to acknowledge that wisdom exists beyond your perspective. It takes courage to kneel in a world that celebrates standing alone. But in that kneeling, strength is born. The world may measure success by dominance, by influence, by applause. But eternal success is measured by obedience, by faithfulness, by service. The loudest voice is not always the truest one. The most popular idea is not always the wisest one. In the end, identity is not discovered by asserting independence from God. It is discovered by returning to Him. The image is restored not through self-expression, but through self-denial. The paralysis of pride is healed not by louder declarations, but by quieter surrender. This is not about political systems or cultural debates. It is about the condition of the human heart. A heart ruled by pride will distort everything it touches. A heart surrendered to God will bring life wherever it goes. The question remains, will you live by self-definition or by divine design? Will you cling to pride or embrace humility? Will you speak about faith or walk in obedience? The choice determines whether you remain spiritually paralyzed or become spiritually alive. Because in the end, it is not about shouting a Lord with your lips. It is about embodying obedience in your life. It is not about claiming rights. It is about fulfilling purpose. It is not about being served. It is about serving. And when pride falls, the true image rises.